Så där, nu är inspelningen igång och jag vill passa på att hälsa alla som tittar nu och i framtiden varmt välkomna till Ett Enklare Liv som presenteras av Center Stockholm. Och jag som talar nu heter Patrik Rovinski. Jag har presenterat mig många gånger tidigare, men den här gången så är det inte jag som kommer vara här och tala, utan jag bara står och rattar den här inspelningen. Utan med mig så har jag Per och Stefan och gäster ända från Kanada, Salt Spring Island, och det är Jan och Chip Chipman som är med oss ikväll. Och de är väldigt kända inom 3P-communityn och var med och de fick ju lära sig de 3 principerna direkt från Sydney Banks. Så vi ser otroligt fram emot att få ha dem här ikväll och få prata med dem. Och vad vi ska prata om, det vet jag inte riktigt. Det kommer vi säkert dyka upp här under kvällens gång. Men jag vill också bara säga att det vanliga formatet vi brukar ha är ungefär 60-90 minuter. Där vi har en dialog med våra gäster. Och vi ser fram emot, och de ser faktiskt fram emot att kunna svara på frågor även från er som lyssnar och tittar på det här ikväll. Men har ni en fråga så sitt på den eller ställ den via chatten, så kommer Per och Stefan ta hand om den på något sätt under kvällen. Jag ska gå iväg och vara med min 3-åring nu, men jag är tillbaka om ungefär 45 minuter. Men jag lämnar varmt över till Stefan och Per och Jan och Chip. Stefan.
Yeah, welcome everyone. Today I have a great pleasure to present Jan and Chip Chipman of Vantage Consulting Group. They live in Salt Spring Island, a beautiful island just outside of Vancouver in Canada. They give speeches and provide consulting and coaching to companies and individuals all over the world. They were mentored by the Sydney Banks from 1975 till 2009. For 24 years, they consulted and coached companies in Florida and even went into prison and worked with prisoners, a special program for them. Chip is also president of the 3 Principle Foundation, and 2008 he co-founded along with Elsie Spittle 3 Principle School, a wish that Sydney Banks had before he passed away. So, welcome guys. Nice to have you here.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, so nice to be with this group. Really lovely.
I'm just going to turn off our phone, make sure it doesn't ring here.
That's a good idea.
Okay. Before, I'm just a little introduction. How you to get into the 3 principles? How you, how do you discover it? Or how do you? Yeah, can you tell me a little bit about your story?
That would be great. I mean, this is a nice opportunity because most people have heard our story before, but I suspect there's a few people here that haven't. So, I'll just give it a little bit of background, then let Jan talk about in the early 70s, we had been married just a few years, maybe 5 or 6 years. And our marriage was not in good shape. We were going to have a divorce, as a matter of fact. Now we've been married for 47 years, so something must have worked out somewhere. But, it's one of those things where I grew up, and Jan as well, but I grew up in a very unhealthy environment with alcoholism, violence, Jan with the alcoholism, not the violence. And so when we first met, we had a wonderful marriage for the first few years, but it's one thing to experience happiness. It's another thing to know how to keep it and to remain happy. So even as happy as we were when we first got together, after a few years, my old depression and upset that came from my history, my background, creeped back into our marriage. And we were at a point where life was not good for us. We were not happy. Our marriage was coming to an end, really. And then something happened.
Well, I had heard about somebody named Sydney Banks who was giving talks, had just started talking to people nearby in another town nearby. And some of our neighbors and friends had started to listen to Sid, had been to his talks. And that was the first I ever heard of Sydney Banks. And at the time, we were so into our search for something mystical and spiritual and something other than the way we'd been raised when we were children. We wanted to find something different. And so we'd been studying spiritual books and going to a Buddhist center, but we didn't really pay attention to the fact that all this search wasn't really bringing us happiness. It was actually making us more unhappy. And so all of a sudden, our neighbors that we used to engage in many discussions about politics and how bad the world was and how we were going to fix it, and typical of the late 60s and early 70s, some of these people started to become happy, and they wouldn't talk about negative things with us anymore. And so we just thought, well, if this person, Sydney Banks, is making people so happy, then there can't be any value in that, because the world is a serious place, and if you're searching for something spiritual, it should be serious. So we just got more unhappy, but one day I just happened to be with some friends who were visiting Sydney Banks, and they had been listening to him, for maybe a few months, and they were starting to annoy me because they wouldn't engage in our negative talks and arguments anymore. They were too happy, But anyway, so one day I was with them, and I didn't have a car. I was getting a ride with them, and they were visiting Sid and his family. And when I got to Sid's house with our friends, I was very, very shy. And I remember meeting Sid's first wife, Barb, who was just the most beautiful, gentle person. And she was so welcoming, and she, invited me in and offered me some lunch. And then she said, well, come into the living room. And I could tell there were some voices in there. They had some company. So when I walked into the living room, I remember I looked over to my right, and there was sitting on the sofa was this man that I knew it had to be Sid, even though I'd never seen a picture of him or anything. And he looked over, and I just saw this amazingly gentle, beautiful person, like very, very warm person. And I was introduced to him, and I just, it kind of got rid of my, thoughts about what he would be like. And so I just, came in and sat down and joined the group of people. There were maybe like 8 people, a few couples that were visiting Sid and Barb. And I just sat and listened, and because I was very shy and I didn't know these people. So there were people just chatting with Sid and his wife, but then all of a sudden it got kind of quiet, and Sid started to talk in a really calm way about just spiritual ideas, and what at the time seemed ideas to me. But as he talked, I realized he was just saying one spiritual fact after another. And and it just everything he said just made me think of all the wise people and, that I'd always been interested in over my life. Like, the philosophers, or, people who obviously had some wisdom, And as I listened, I just kept thinking that this man everything he's saying is true. And he's got the essence of everything I've always believed to be truth. And I just kept getting calmer, and my resistance went away, and I just wanted to hear what he had to say. And as he talked, all of a sudden he looked over and he was looking at me, and he said, you know, if people in this room could see how beautiful they really are, like who they really are on the inside, they'd have all the happiness they could ever want. And I had walked into that room as a very, very unhappy person. I had been feeling, you know, our marriage was coming to an end. I was unhappy almost every day of the year because I was so worried about our marriage and the fact that we just couldn't get along anymore. And at that time we had a little son about 3 years old. And so I was worried all the time what would become of me and our son and Chip. And I was just afraid of life. I had become very insecure around people. I would get upset with people if they looked at me the wrong way. I mean, I was just a mess, right? So as I sat there and I listened to Sid talk, for the first time in I don't know how long, I just forgot about my thoughts about my marriage and my life, and I just got drawn into this beautiful feeling. And all of a sudden, I'd heard what Sid said about there's another part of me that I hadn't seen that's beautiful, and I in that moment I just felt like all my worry about my future just was gone, and all my thoughts about my past and all the unhappiness was gone. And I felt as if my life was in front of me, and it was this beautiful pathway, and it was all going to be fine. It was going to be beautiful. And that was in 1975. Mm. And I know that since then, I've never let go of that feeling. I mean, we have our ups and downs like any couple, but from that moment on, my life has changed. And as Sid kept talking, I realized that if all the people that I'd always listened to, the wise people, if I really listened to what they said, they were all trying to tell us that you can only find the answer inside yourself. And that the wisdom is inside us. And in that moment, I really felt what they were talking about. Like I felt that if that's true, that the wisdom is inside us, then what all the wisdom I'm hearing from this man that I just met isn't coming from him. It looks like he's got the wisdom and I'm hearing it. But if what the wise people were saying was that it's inside us, then the wisdom I'm hearing in this moment is not coming from that man, it's coming from me. And that was the first time in my whole life I'd ever really felt and known that wisdom is inside me, and it's there forever, and it's always been there. And it was so strong that, as I said, all my worries dropped away and all my unhappiness just dropped away. I felt amazing. And then Sid kept talking, and because there were couples in the room, all of a sudden he was saying that if you're in an argument with somebody, especially, you know, it's your wife or husband, and you feel like you want to win that argument, he said it's a really good idea to just let go of your wanting to win the argument. Just let go of it and just drop that thought and just feel good inside, right? And not worry about the other person. And I remember thinking, well, right away I started to think now about why I would want to defend my point of view with Chip. But I thought, I'm going to try that when I get home. I'm going to pay attention to that and see if, you know, be open to that idea of just not arguing anymore or trying to win an argument. So then at the end of the afternoon, we all said goodbye and I left. And when I got home that day, I remember I walked up to our house and I knew that Chip was there with our little son. And I thought, he's going to be so happy to hear that I met somebody like that, what we've been looking for. We've been looking for somebody who had found the answers in life. We thought it was going to be someone in India or Tibet. But here, I had just met this amazing person, and so I remember going up to the door and waiting to see Chip and tell him about this.
So was Chip happy? To be honest, I thought it sounded so simplistic. It sounded silly to me. We've been working so hard to try and find something. We've been searching for so long. And then Jan comes home and she looks great. She's really happy. And she's basically telling me we don't have any problems. It's just thought, And I'm like, yeah, right. I don't think so, And I started to argue. And Jan started to argue with me a little bit. And then she just stopped, right? And she said, okay. And she walked away. And that really upset me that she wouldn't argue about it, because I wanted to let her know and have her discuss the fact that this guy couldn't possibly know anything. He's just a welder. He's never been to India, he's never been to China, he's never been to Tibet. There's no way he can know anything. And so I really didn't think much of it. It was just an irritant. It was just irritating that Jan was going on about this guy that she met on Salt Spring Island, and that she was feeling really, really happy. And so after she stopped talking to me about it, I thought, well, this will go away, be back to normal in the morning. So that night we went to bed, and I got up and I could hear singing coming from the kitchen. I thought, there's no singing in my house. What is this? And then I got down, I thought, oh, she's still into that, whatever happened yesterday, this happiness stuff. And I started to debate it with her again, to argue, to talk about it's harder than that. And you have to, you have to meditate for years and listen to wise people for years. And you can't just be happy overnight. That doesn't happen. And she started to argue with me a little bit. And then she just stopped again. And see, this was a pattern that would happen for the next few weeks, where this is looking back on it now, but at the time, I think I was desperate to have her back where I knew her, back in our old relationship where we could argue and be upset. And I knew the handles on that relationship. I knew how it worked. And now none of that worked anymore. So, I would say things to hurt Jan's feelings at that time, to see if I could get her back to where I knew her, Sometimes I'd say something that was not kind or upsetting, and she would get upset for a moment. But I'd always see that moment when she would just stop and just, I'm not going there. It was quite upsetting for me. It was quite upsetting that my wife should be so happy, and without doing all that work in particular. It was very upsetting. And it finally, I won't go into the details of how it happened, but I finally decided to talk to the people that Jan had been with when she visited Sid. And when I told Jan that I wanted to talk to them, she was thrilled. What she didn't know, that in my head, I'm going to tell these people this is a bunch of crap. They need to butt out of my marriage and so on and so forth. But she was thrilled that I wanted to talk to them. And they invited us over for breakfast on a Sunday morning, and we went over there. And Jan's all happy, and I'm thinking, I'm going to tell these people just. So we go over to their house, like really nice. They've got some toast and some coffee, and Jan went in and sat down with the gentleman on the couch and started talking. And I turned around, and this woman had 2 cups of coffee and was putting them down on the table in the dining room. And I realized I was going to have to talk to this woman. I went, oh man, I do not want to talk to this woman about this Sid Bank stuff, And she says she made a big mistake. She said, Chip, what's on your mind? And so I started telling her how much I knew and she didn't, and how simple and stupid this was, that life was way more complicated than, it's just thought. And I'm really getting upset, And at one point I actually started hitting the table. He's like, "Whoa!" And I looked over at Jan, and I was like, "Ah," you know. In the middle of my tirade, my outrage, this very quiet woman who had always, I think, been kind of insecure around me, she put her finger at me like this. She said, "Just a minute, Chip." And I said, "What?" You know? And she said, "I've never, ever had a conversation with Jan about your marriage. Never." And it kind of took, you know, the wind from my sails, because I was assuming that they'd sat around talking about our marriage, but they hadn't, you know. And then I'm kind of quiet for a moment, and she goes, "You know, the only thing that stands between you and Jan and all the happiness and love in this world is thought." And my mind immediately went to, how stupid is that? But then I had an experience, and the only way I can describe it is this. As she said that, I happened to look over her shoulder at Jan, and this feeling just went, you know, I filled up with feeling, and I wasn't expecting that. I didn't know where it came from. I filled up, and I started to tear up, and that was the last thing I wanted to have happen in front of this woman, you know. And the next part is just my way of describing something that happened inside my head. I had that amazing feeling, and then it was like I could see all of our arguments as these little piles in my head, you know. And the thought occurred to me, I was like looking at that, and the thought occurred to me, well, of course they're just thought. What else could they possibly be? And then that feeling rushed in even stronger, and I started to get emotional. And I couldn't handle it. I stood up and said, "This is a bunch of, you know, bleak." And I walked out, right? And Jan, I think, apologized for my behavior and followed me out to the car and was telling me on the way home how rude I'd been. And it was the strangest feeling, because I knew I was caught. Not because of anything that the woman said or that Janet said, because of what I'd seen myself in that one split second, that all of that suffering we were going through was thought. I knew it. But my ego did not want to accept that I knew that right away. And so for another couple of weeks, I just was by myself. I was just really in a bad place. Then one day I was sitting on the couch, and Jan was on the floor playing with our son, who was maybe how old at the time? 4, maybe 3. And it was just, I don't know how to explain it. There was like light coming in from the window and shining hair, and they were playing. And that feeling just rushed in again. And I remember really clearly the thought that occurred to me. I just thought, all I have to do is surrender. There's nothing to figure out. And everything just switched. Everything just totally switched. And I became curious about what this Sid Banks guy had to say for the first time. And we started going to hear Sid speak. But that moment it started with those people in their house. And after a couple of weeks, that moment was really more me accepting what I'd seen, accepting my first insight. And our life has never been the same ever since. You know, everything changed. Our work, our friends, our marriage in particular. Like it was, when I look back at it now, like we instantly were happy together, you know? And I would try and think, well, what changed? Did we stop doing this? Did we start doing, it was nothing, like you couldn't see exactly in the world of thought and how we interacted. You couldn't actually, I couldn't put my finger on what had actually changed, and yet everything was changed. You know, it was a strange thing just to accept that and be happy and begin to live in a new world. You know? So that's kind of how we got started.
What do you think happened when you get you told me she told that it's just thought in the way. What do you think is happening in you? Is it you caught off guard, or because you were, what I understand, you were loading up and angry to tell her. You were skeptic.
Oh, absolutely.
But she reached you on a different, how do you say it, level, or you understand what I mean? What?
Yeah, the thing that changed that I think really finally made me look was that Jan's change. At first, I thought it would go away.
Mm.
And then I began to understand. It was clear to me that it was deep and it was permanent. And I had never seen that before in my whole life. I had never seen anybody change in that way. And if you look at the history of the principles from Sid's experience forward, it's the same phenomena every time. Like, Sid changed so much that his friends at work couldn't even recognize him physically. He was so changed. Mm. His family was so shocked by his change that they thought he'd lost his mind at first. They thought he was having a nervous breakdown, is the way they described it. Mm. But then they saw, as they watched, that the change was permanent, it was calm, it was beautiful, and that he was healthy. And so people around him, once they saw that, they went from shock to curiosity. And then from curiosity to deep listening, and then their own insights. The same way, I became curious because I could see, whether I wanted to deny it or not, I could see that Jan was happy. I could see that she had shifted her way of viewing life completely, which is what I thought for the last 10 years I've been searching for, however long it was. And so what made me look was the fact of that change. Now we can go forward. If you take you mentioned the prison work that we did.
Yes, please.
We went in and did those classes. We shared Sid's books and we shared videos. But the change in the prison really took off when the first 2 or 3 people had deep insights. The first 2 or 3 inmates had really deep insights and became very different people in a matter of a week or so, and started interacting with the other inmates differently, with the corrections officer differently, and holding themselves very differently, just very differently. Now, in that environment, nobody had ever seen that happen. Not even close, nothing even remotely like that. Nobody had ever seen somebody not only have a happy experience, but keep that happiness most of the time. Now, I could take that same idea and go to when we worked in business, when we worked with executive groups. If we worked with an executive group of 20 people and we did a retreat, I always kind of do the math this way, is generally speaking, there's 3 or 4 people who really get hit and really hear something and really have, and it's almost always that they talk not about work, but about their marriage or their children or whatever. But they become very, very different people very quickly. And the rest of that, in that group, let's say there's 20 people, there's 3 or 4 that hear something deeply right away. They're ready. It's their time, right? And then there's 4 or 5 in the middle that go, gee, I wish that was true. That sounds great, but it's too simple. And there's another group that goes, I don't think so. This is a hard world and this is too simple, right? But what happens is the behavior, and in business, the performance of those people that hear something stands out so much that middle group goes, oh, right, it is possible. Something can happen. And then among the rest of that group, curiosity begins to be aroused because they're seeing that change. And I'm sure it's the same in Sweden. You know what I mean? It's like the words are beautiful and some people get moved and they get touched, but observing real change that brings other people along. And so that's what changed me, was the change in Jan. It's what brought curiosity rather than skepticism, right? Because I can be skeptical as an intellectual about all of the ideas and the 3 principles. I can be as skeptical as I want, but you can't really be skeptical about a permanent, positive, healthy change.
I think something that I don't want to forget right now to mention is that, because I know we've all come across, and we've been there ourselves, people that say, well, now that I found out this and it's changed my life, I want somebody else in my life to get this. I want my husband or my wife or my child or my cousin or my boss, you know. And so what I learned really early on was that when a few weeks after I'd, had this happiness come into my life, and I could see that Chip was still not finding that happiness yet, but he was, and I was, really aware that not to argue about it or anything, but underneath that, something in me was still waiting for Chip to change, and for him to get happy and for him to find what I was finding. And one day I was looking over at Chip and he hadn't found that beautiful feeling yet. He was still struggling and trying to figure this out. And I looked over and I saw his face was kind of stressed and unhappy. And instead of me thinking, oh, I wish he would just, become happy, I looked over and I heard what Sid was trying to tell me about seeing the world as beautiful, just fine, just the way it is. Like, not try and make the world, well, I wish it were this or I wish it were that. Just see the world as beautiful as is. And in that moment, when I looked at Chip, I saw, why would I want to change him? He's perfect. He's beautiful. And I didn't see that exterior face of, worry and stress that he had. I saw past that. I saw the Chip that I fell in love with, and I saw that beautiful essence of Chip. I really did. I didn't see anything negative. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, I knew that there's nothing to change. I wasn't wanting him to change. And I saw who he was. And I know that's really at the heart of everything we've done since then, when we work, as Chip said, with prisoners and with business people, and now with clients that we, see for consulting and mentoring, that all we have to do is, once you find that beauty inside yourself, is just know that it's in whoever you're talking to. You don't have to try and change their behavior or anything about them. You just have to know that they have this perfection inside them, the way we all do, and it's up to them to find it. We can't change anyone's behavior or find the truth for them or show them explain it to them. All we can do is know that it's in there and know that they will find it when they're ready.
Yeah, when Stefan, when you were asking about that change for me, when Jan mentioned that at one point she really saw that she didn't need me, I don't know how, but I felt that. See, I felt that drop away. That it wasn't just that she stopped trying to convince me about Sid Banks' principles. Is that her way of being with me had dropped. The whole thing of trying to change me, I could feel that it dropped away. So it was an interesting experience, because on one hand, it bothered me because I'm really on my own, right?
Yeah.
But it also was part of what brought that curiosity up.
Was it the place she was in? You think that it's contagious?
Yeah, in a sense, it is. It's like a really good virus. Like the prison, it was really interesting. The first few people change, and we have just a few people coming to our class. Within 3 weeks, we have a waiting list. Well, what happened? Something happened. People saw that something. When people see that something is possible, then hope enters into their thinking. As soon as hope enters into their thinking, then they become open and curious. And before that, they like me, I know the world, the way the world is made. I know what's bad, And then you observe something you've never seen before. You know, this health come out in the prison in 2 or 3 people, for instance, in the beginning. And at first, I'm sure you're skeptical. You know, they just drank the Kool-Aid. You know, but then you see that after a few weeks, they're solid. You know, they're absolutely solid. So in that sense, it is like a virus, because that hope gets into people's thinking, and it takes their thinking in a different direction. Did me, for sure.
And it's contagious. But if there's somebody who's trying to resist it, like I was in the beginning, I could see people becoming happier, and, you know, then another person, and so I knew there was something going on that was contagious, but I was resisting it. I was resistant. So the beauty is we can't worry about the people that are resistant, because no matter how resistant someone is, they still have that truth and that wisdom inside them. And so now I don't pay attention to the resistance like I did back then. And learning, still learning that, because I know there's people in my life that are resisting being happy, but I don't try and change their behavior. And I know this is happening for all of you, when you get more of an understanding of people, and you're not worried about whether they're, you know, about their behavior so much. You have an understanding. Well, we're all in the same boat. I'm not perfect every day. Some days I'm resistant to happiness. So that understanding that we all inside are the same, and we're all made of pure love on the inside, I think that's the gift, because it helps us forget about trying to change behavior, or even be bothered by other people's behavior. Because now I think less and less about what other people are doing.
It's almost like if you can hold that, if you can be that space for anyone, be that space for them, and not be judgmental or want to change things. You really holding a space for change for them.
Beautiful.
I think that's exactly right. That's the contagious part.
That was so
Perfect.
beautiful, Per. I love the way you said that. Thank you.
It's very, very true. Very true. You know, in the prison, a lot of times we would hear from the corrections officers, they would say, how come your class is so peaceful and quiet? We have to, almost every other class, we have to come in and take somebody out after an argument or whatever. What are you guys doing? We didn't know what we were doing. But the way I look at it is, you know, that if you really see that somebody has that within them, then you don't need to be thinking about, like you said, the judgment, Per. You don't have to be thinking about that. Well, again, for this group first group we met with in the prison, they never experienced anybody seeing them as healthy. They experienced everybody looking at them as broken, right? And seriously broken if they're in prison. And we didn't have that. And as a matter of fact, when we went through orientation to do our program, and they wanted us to read the files of people that we were going to be working with, and we refused to read the files. We didn't want to know, you know. And it's not that we didn't want to know, like we didn't want to be bothered with it. It's like the one thing that Sid showed us early on was to talk to the person behind the mask, to ignore the outside, and people in the prison felt the absence of that judgment, and maybe for the first time in many, many years, that there was no judgment coming from us, that we were here to talk about something that they had within that was valuable. And it changed everything right from the very first class that we held in prison. People could feel that lack of judgment, and it was accepted as a form of deep respect. You know? And that's the other thing about all the people if we ever have any desire to change anybody, that's a form of disrespect for their separate reality. People, you have to respect a person's separate reality. That doesn't mean that you don't talk to the soul inside, you don't talk soul to soul, but you respect their right to be wherever they are, you know. So it's very interesting dynamic. And I think That's one of the things with all the therapists we know. You know, in therapy, the burnout rate is huge. People burn out in that profession. It's huge. But none of the therapists we know have ever experienced burnout. Not one. And we know hundreds and hundreds and hundreds now. They don't experience burnout because they're not talking about the stuff that creates burnout. And they're not sitting there judging the people that they're working with. They're seeing another soul in front of them. And they want to draw that soul out into a dialogue, out into a level of rapport where we are equal.
I have a question from Marie. I can read it for you. Have you come across people who are really slow getting it or not getting it at all?
You're looking at one, Marie.
But I think it's a common question.
Yeah. You know, it's really hard to tell. I'll give you something that happened last year as an example. I was working with a company quite a few years ago, maybe 25 years ago, you know. And I've been invited to do a brief retreat. And we were going into the room where we're going to do the retreat. And there was a gentleman who was, shall we say, resistant. And he took me aside to let me know that he thought this was a bunch of crap and a waste of time. He was very adamant about it, right? And he was very rigid through the whole thing. And I've just learned just to let that go and speak to whoever wants to hear something. And he never said anything, but 15 years later, maybe longer, I get a phone call from this guy, this very guy. And I was shocked. And what he wanted to tell me was that he was so grateful for what he heard in that class because it saved his marriage and it saved his relationship with his kids. Now, I don't know how long that took, you know, whether it was 10 years later, something went on or whatever. You just really don't know, you know. And there are people who are very resistant and they're entitled to their resistance. So well, that's the thing.
In the beginning of our story, when that was us, I came home and I didn't expect that Chip would be, now that we've, you know, I've realized I know what happiness looks like. I can feel it now, finally, after many years. And then I thought, well, Chip would be joining me with that, and he didn't at first. So I kept remembering what Sid would say about all you have to do is find the happiness for yourself. And over the years, that's helped me so many times when we raised our kids. Our kids are grown up now and off on their own. And when I would, you know, be upset about something, not that we ever had really big problems with them, but if I, you know, was seeing them struggling through something and wanting them to get over it quickly or whatever, instead of just letting them be, I remember just always, you know, it would occur to me again, all I can do is take care of my own state of mind. And I know that applies in any kind of work that I do or in my personal life. That, like, if I'm sitting with, and this happened to me recently, I was sitting with a client on Skype, and I was actually shocked to hear the way they were talking about their work and trying to, you know, get me to see it their way, because they were using, you know, some techniques that I think, you know, even though they just met me, I think, because this was our first session, I think they knew that I wasn't, I would never use the techniques that they were using, you know. So this person kept trying to tell me about how these techniques work, you know, and I part of me was wanting to address that and just, you know, stop them from thinking that. But I just sat back and I just kept listening and watching this person like I was watching, you know, a story, and just letting them talk and letting that person share the way they were doing things. And I could see they weren't happy. They were they were trying to justify what they were doing, and the more I sat back, the more this person kept talking and trying to get me to see it their way. And if I said, well, when I first learned this from Sid, like he didn't have any techniques, and I learned so much that I, it's helped me to be able to share that with others and watch their lives change. But the person wasn't hearing, he didn't want to hear any of that. And so I started to just sit back even more, and I had to get myself into the feeling again and realize this is a beautiful soul who's caught up in his own way of looking at life. He's trying to convince me of it. And the more I just calmed down inside and took care of me, not worry about whether how is this going to play out now that I have to coach this person so many sessions? And I just calmed myself down, and I wouldn't let those thoughts of negativity about that person, I wouldn't let them stay in my head. I just kept taking care of me and my feeling. And by the end of the call, just a little bit, the person let go and got into the feeling just a little bit, and backed up from trying to convince me. And I knew that's all I had to do, was just let that happen in the person, because if somebody's resistant, that's still their choice, and that's what they're going to do. And this was in a relationship where if I were talking to somebody in a relationship who was in danger or something of somebody hurting them, their spouse was hurting them, or being abusive, of course I would help that person take care of themselves. It's not that you want to let people hurt you. You can't let people hurt you, and you would automatically take care of yourself in a relationship where if there was abuse or something. But like just in a conversation or working with somebody who, as you say, is resistant, again, if you take care of your own state of mind, really that's all you can do, and it's the best thing you can do.
It works that way with groups as well, like before I move on to groups just for a second, I remember going to Sid about a client that I was really struggling with, and saying to Sid, this guy, he's just not getting, he's very intellectual, and Sid just shrugged and he said, you can't win them all, Chip. And it kind of shocked me, you just can't win them all. And really what he meant was you need to respect that person's separate reality. Now, if somebody keeps coming to you, that's a sign that they're looking, even if they throw out their stuff, but you still have to respect the fact that they have a separate reality. And if you do that, going back to what Tara said, it's the feeling that'll shift. Like if Jan took care of her feeling, like she said, that'll shift the level of rapport. And if it doesn't, there's nothing you can do about that, Now, when I was talking to Sid about that, he was laughing because, it's like you were talking about one person, and if your batting average is, that's an American baseball term, I guess. If your batting average is really, really high, like 5 times higher than what's out there in normal therapy and so on, you have to look at that too. You really cannot and will not win them all. Like going to groups, because the subject comes up in groups too. Like if you're ever with a group and one person wants to control the group with their questions and negativity and upset and intellectual, challenging and so on. In the past, I used to think I had to really sort that person out. It would come up, and I'd end up talking to that one person for half the class, and the rest of the group is like, And I remember asking Sid about that as well, and he said, now he wasn't talking about a specific person, but what he said was, talk to the highest person. Talk to the highest level of understanding in the room. Speak to that, and kindly set aside the other. You can even say things. Can I talk to you later? Can we talk about that later? And that was so, so helpful, because what we learned over time was that if you talk to that highest level of understanding in the room that you're addressing, that everybody else, including that person that's stuck, gets to listen to that. And so the conversation goes to the highest level of understanding, and everybody gets the maximum out of it. And so over the years, we've learned to do that. I mean, we do it with kindness and compassion, but you know, one of the schools we had, somebody kept bringing up starving children in Africa and, you know, all these terrible things that were happening in Syria and so on. And I know that, and I know the world has some horrible things happening, but we're not going to solve them now. We're going to solve them when more and more people get a deeper level of consciousness. So I said what I could to this person about, first of all, appreciating that it is terrible, you know, those things are happening. But what we're doing here is exploring an understanding of what humanity really is, and that understanding, the lifting of the level of consciousness of humanity, is the only thing that's going to change those things long term. And that turned into an amazing conversation with that particular group at the school.
I got another question from Maria here, but I think what she meant is, you hear these great stories of insights and people who changed overnight and became happier, their marriages, everything. And is there wanting to get something, to understand something, so they are chasing that insight or change for themselves? Is it, she asked, but can you also wanting to get it too much? You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. That's a super question. That's great. Yeah, wanting insight and desire for insight won't get you insight. You have to be kind to yourself and just listen more. You know, because I've been there. Like, because we came out of a Zen Buddhist tradition before we met Sid, I had this idea that you have to find enlightenment. You know, the Big Bang. You know. Yeah. That really stopped me from having insights with Sid for a long time. Even after that first one. For a long time, because I was looking for that Big Bang. Where's that next big insight where everything's going to be perfect? That stopped me from hearing, you know. And it was when I just decided to just listen a little bit more and not worry about when that next insight was coming. Just set that aside, you know, and just really listen. And then I would find myself in just a quiet state, and things would start to come to me. The desire for insight, or the desire to have that same insight come back, you know, that, right? That's just our thinking again. You know, that's just our thinking getting a hold of us, and we're searching again. We're back in the search, you know. See, the way I look at it is, once you have an insight, patience is really important. Patience with yourself, right? Because when you don't have patience, you have desire. And when you have desire, you're searching. And when you're searching, you're in your thinking, and you're actually acting in a way that's totally not true in terms of who and what you really are. You have everything that you're looking for inside. You are a truly beautiful person. I began to see, once I let go of the idea of the big insight or enlightenment, that the knowledge that Sid had, that he gained in his experience, was something that I had within me. And whether I was getting it a little piece at a time or bigger pieces, that wasn't what was important. What was important was I was moving in the direction of my true self. I was moving in the direction of what I had within me. And that's what I started to really hear Sid say, and that anything else, particularly any desire would happen faster, would only get in the way, you know. And one of the reasons it really gets in the way is, I'll bet everybody here who's had any little insight at all, okay, into the principles or into our true nature, At that moment, I'll bet you felt truly grateful. Right? I know I did. The relief and the gratitude was enormous. Right? And what we're learning is that feeling of gratitude and staying with that is how you get more. Right? Because once you have the feeling of gratitude is the absolute opposite of the feeling of desire. Right? The feeling of gratitude is more in keeping, is closer to our true nature. It's a recognition of our true nature. There's nobody on this planet any wiser than you. Nobody. I don't care who they are. I don't care how eloquently they speak about the principles. There is nobody on this planet any wiser than you. And even when Sid Banks was here, there still was nobody any wiser than you. And when we just have gratitude for that, that is a spiritual fact. Right? It's a spiritual fact that the wisdom that we're embracing, the insights that we're encountering, are coming from within ourselves. They're not something that's being transferred from one person to the other. It's us recognizing something. It's a remembering of who and what we are. It's a remembering of our true spiritual nature. Right? And so, Marie, that was really a beautiful question. And I can tell you right now, with all of our clients in the last year, I'll bet you probably one of the main subjects we've talked about in the last year is patience and kindness towards yourself.
I remember when I had my first big insight, and it was, I don't remember what it was, but the feeling was so great. So I just bought a Hawaii lecture, I think it was from Sydney Banks, and I put it on the CD in the car just to get more insights and chasing more. And then I remember just heard from Sid in that speech that he said that just be grateful for what you understand now. And and that just wow.
That's beautiful, Stefan. What I'd like to share is that there are ways myself that because to me the thing that helps me go deeper is the quieter my mind is, because that's where the unknown is and the new insights come in when the quieter my mind is. And I noticed a few years ago my mind was so busy, I didn't notice it right away, but then one day I woke up in the morning and realized I've got all these thoughts already about, what could go wrong today, and it just shocked me, like this isn't the way I want to live, this isn't what I talk about with other people about living. And so I just started to listen to Sid in the mornings again, because in the morning, my mind is quieter, at least, and at the later on in the day, and I'd got into a habit of starting my work day right away. So I changed my habit of and I started to value that quiet time in the morning, and every day I noticed my mind was getting quieter and quieter, and then I noticed that my life was changing again, like it did in the beginning when we first heard Sid, and my work was changing, my work was getting easier, and the feelings of love were coming more to me, like my feelings of love towards Chip and less judgmental feelings. And so I know that quiet mind is like the perfect environment for that health to come in your life and show itself in all the things that you want in your life.
Thoughts are so so sneaky, I realized last year. Like in the beginning I was so free and I was so happy when I realized like the feeling was coming from my thinking, but after a while I got irritated again. But it was new thing. It was like but I understand. So this is it's so sneaky. It's so sneaky, and it's like having different appearance. And I recognize now that as soon as I feel like a victim, or thought are here again, personal thinking.
Yeah, that's amazing, Tara. It's like even thinking about the principles can take you away from your true self.
Yeah.
I meet some young people now that they spend their whole life online looking at things about the principles. They go to every course they can. And so I'm going to tell you a story about that. In the early days, we were so excited because all our friends were changing, so much was changing, and we were talking about it all the time, the principles this, the Sid Banks that, you know. So one day we were at Sid's house, and we were having a barbecue, and there was maybe 12 or 15 of us there. And we were all going on about, oh, my mind did this, and my thinking that, and, you know, going on and on and on. And Sid was fixing hot dogs and hamburgers on the grill while we were going on. And all of a sudden he said, quit talking about that stuff. We're like, whoa, you know, whoa, you know? And he just looked at us, a very kind face, and he said, you know, the place you're going to find the real essence of this is in the most ordinary part of your life. He said, really have respect for the ordinary part of your life. And really what he meant was, if you talk about it all the time and you think about it all the time, you know, that's where you are. And it's in the ordinary, quiet moments of your life that you actually find out what you've really learned, what's really been given. And I'll never forget that day because I was shocked by it. And then ever since that, I see more and more that, yes, you go and hear people speak, you listen to Sid, you talk with your friends, that's great. But at some point, you need to be quiet. You know, you need to take that walk. You need to just be by yourself and be yourself, you know. And we learned so much from that. And you know, Sid would often say about being ordinary. He used to say, if you want to be extraordinary, you must first be ordinary. Because while you're searching for how to be extraordinary, you're lost from your true self. You know? And so those quiet times become more and more important. People think, for instance, that all those years we hung out with Sid for more than 40 years, they picture us sitting around with him talking about wisdom and the principles all the time. I guarantee you, he spoke about it maybe 5% of the time. The rest was how he lived and the feeling that he had. And we would go and visit with him. We would go shopping with him. We would, you know, go to different cities with him when he was speaking. And he just rarely talked about anything, but he had this feeling about him. Like we always joke, every cup of tea he had was the very best cup of tea. He'd say, this is the best cup of tea I've ever had. We would laugh, but he meant it. He really meant it. You know? And so in the beginning, for instance, in the first few months when we would hang out with him, if I couldn't accept that feeling, if that feeling of that quiet and that peace bothered me, I would make an excuse to leave. I couldn't stand to be around him in the beginning, you know, until I started to get quieter and just go with it and just be with him, you know. And he had an enormous respect for quiet and who and what we are on the inside, and that really didn't require any thinking. It really didn't require any thinking.
I got another question from a guy who's, what do you mean by quiet mind and how do you become more quiet?
Well, for me,
Is it a doing or, yeah.
That's a wonderful question. I love it. I love it. And for me, I know that inside me is a whole other entity, you know, like there's this me, my personality, but inside and interacting with the world, right? Everyday things. But I know that that's not the real me, that the true self is always in there. The true self is something that I've had glimpses of when I've had an insight and I've got a beautiful feeling that just comes over me. And a beautiful feeling is an indicator that you're connecting with your true self, even the slightest bit. And so to me, when I get that beautiful feeling, my mind is quieter because I'm not thinking about all the details of life. I'm not judging people. I'm just feeling that what I think life truly is beauty and understanding. And so when that's the way I see what a quiet mind is it when you're in that feeling. And so when I'm in that feeling, I might be doing things and, working or cleaning the kitchen or whatever, and it may look like I'm busy, but if I'm in that feeling, that it's a quiet mind. But now when I get caught up in the details of life and I feel overwhelmed, like there's too much to do and I'll never get caught up and everything, or if I'm worried too much about whether I'm learning enough about the principles or whatever, that's a busy mind. So to me, the indicator is the feeling. When you feel just like you see beauty around you and you have a nice feeling towards people around you, to me that's showing that quieter mind, which is leading you to your true self. Because to me, like the true self, I'm not Sid, but he talks about the nothingness and the essence of life. That to me, that would be like the quietest mind, that's inside you. But again, we're living in this world and there's things happening and we can get caught up in that. And then if we lose the feeling, you can guarantee if you don't have that nice feeling, your mind is busy, or if you're bored, that's another sign of a busy mind. So nice feeling, your mind is quieter, and feelings of stress, that your mind is just too busy. So it's, to me, the feeling is the indicator.
Yeah, and we talk about doing and not doing. That's always interesting because I remember challenging Sid early on, like, well, you're telling me I need to get a quiet mind. I must have to do something. Say, no, you don't. No, I heard you say that you need a quiet mind. A quiet mind is how you get there. And I said, well, then you must have to do something. He said, no, you don't, And I said, there must be something we have to do, He said, okay, I'll tell you something you can do. Okay, this is going to be good, He said, point yourself in the right direction and do nothing. And I really had no idea what he meant by that. But eventually, as I started listening more, I started to catch on because, see, the thing about listening, there are no techniques, but the thing about listening is when you really listen, which is very different than listening and analyzing or listening and thinking, listening and trying to sort out whether you believe something or not. You just listen, right? You cannot truly listen and think at the same time. It's not possible, right? So the gift that we have is we have these materials that Sid left behind. And the reason I listen to Sid is he had the experience literally of his personality dying. That's what his experience was. Totally dying and being in that quiet state where he saw the world without interpretation, without the interpretation of his belief system, his thinking, his upbringing. So when I just listen to Sid, I'm listening to somebody that's speaking from that quiet mind, right? And if all I do is listen, I don't analyze it, I don't try and figure it out, then something magical happens where suddenly my mind is quiet. And so those materials are an amazing resource because there's somebody speaking from that state of mind. And nobody can prove to you that that's real until you have an experience of a moment of a quiet mind and you see what you see, you know, and then you know it's true because you're seeing it. Like one of the early insights I had was I really suffered a lot about forgiving my father because Sid often talked about suffering, about forgiveness as a way to get a quieter mind. You know, that if you didn't forgive, all that stuff would be in your head, right? And man, I just couldn't take that because I felt I'd seen things with my father and my upbringing that were not forgivable. So one night Sid was talking about forgiveness again, and I got really upset. And I phoned him the next day and said, "Can I come over and talk to you?" "Yeah, sure, come on over." So I went over to his house. He said, "What's on your mind?" And I said, "Sid, I understand intellectually what you're saying about forgiveness. That's that much less thought I would have in my mind. But you really don't have a right to tell me that because you don't know what I've seen, and some things are not forgivable." Now, in all the years that I knew him, only once or twice was he willing to speak about the details of what was going on in here. And this was one of them. He said, "Tell me." So I told him a couple of really terrible stories of things that I'd seen as a child, right? And he listened. He had the most compassionate look on his face. And when I finished talking, I was waiting to hear what he would say. And what he said was, "Geez, Chip, your father must have really been suffering to have done those things." Right? And I just exploded. That's just my father suffering. And I walked out on Sid and I went home. Later on, I was laying in bed. And for some reason, I started to think of some terrible things I'd said to Jan before we changed. And I just, that feeling, oh God, I wish I hadn't. Oh, that's so terrible, And I was cringing in bed. Jan was asleep. And then it just hit me like a ton of bricks. It just hit me. Wow, those thoughts are from an old world that you don't even live in anymore. Don't bother with it, let it go. And it was a forgiving of myself because I saw that had I known better, which I do now, I would have done better. And it was over. And I remember having this tremendous feeling of peace wash over me. And I slept for like 11 hours, something like that, which I never did ever before. And when I woke up, I had this feeling of lightness that was remarkable, So 2 weeks later, I was lying in bed again and Jan was asleep. And for some reason, I started to think about my father again in this conversation with Sid. But as soon as I started thinking about my father, I went right back to our last encounter. I hadn't seen him then in maybe 12 years, which was a very violent encounter between the two of us when I was about 17. And I felt the hatred. I just felt it so strong. I was laying in their bed. I was actually getting sick thinking about it. And then it just broke. It just stopped. And I had this insight. And the insight was really simple. I saw that my father was living in a world that had been handed to him. And that I just happened to be born in his house. And that he was lost. And it just stunned me that I saw that. It absolutely stunned me. And the next thing that happened really stunned me because all of a sudden I felt this strong feeling of love for my father. I knew that he was innocent. I knew that he was lost, right? And I knew that had he known better, he would have done better. Had he been conscious of the fact that he was trapped in that world, he would have done better. And that was the most profound feeling of peace I'd ever experienced. I couldn't believe it. My mind was so quiet, right? It was so quiet. And I fell asleep in that state. And again, I slept for 11 or 12 hours. And when I woke up, my mind was more quiet than I'd ever experienced in meditation, or it was just clear. And that was the very first time I understood where a true state of meditation comes from, a true state of quiet mind. If you can imagine the volumes and volumes and volumes of thinking that I had around that relationship and the things that I experienced as a kid, volumes, and they were gone. Now, I could recall them, don't misunderstand me, but they were gone from my consciousness, and have been gone ever since, right? So as we have insights, our minds automatically get quieter because there's whole volumes of thinking that we no longer have to engage in. And when I experienced that, I got a completely new understanding of what freedom is. Freedom is the ability to live in the now with a quieter mind because you've seen and understood the true nature of your experience. And that no matter what's going on, what went on in the past, today it really is just thought. It really is just thought. And that you can depend on that there's something in you, there's something that exists before thought that has never been damaged, can never be damaged, will never be damaged because it's not of this world. And so that first insight about my father and his innocence released so much thinking for me, and gave me so much freedom. And that'll be true for all of us. With each insight we have, it's sort of about the past, but it's really about now. What I saw in that moment was about now. When I got quiet enough and I had that look at that experience with my father, I saw new information. Absolutely, totally new information. I mean, if you'd had asked me before that to describe what I was thinking about, it would have taken me weeks and months to explain it. And yet, in that moment, I could explain it in a couple of sentences. And that's the simplicity that Sid talks about. And it's the insight brings us to that simplicity to understand. And that understanding allows us to have a quieter mind.
Wow.
And as far as the beautiful feeling goes, one of the most beautiful things that stands out for me that Sid ever said to me was that if we just see that consciousness, divine consciousness is a beautiful gift that we all have. And every once in a while, a beautiful feeling comes to us. And not to try and make that happen, like not to try and get a beautiful feeling in your life. Just when it does come to you through your gift of consciousness, just be grateful that you're having that beautiful feeling. Mm-hmm. And that will bring more of that beautiful feeling. So again, that's not something you can go out and try and make happen. Just be grateful when you get it.
Absolutely.
Beautiful, beautiful story. I've heard it before, but now, wow. I'm in a really good space right now.
It's been a joy to spend time with all of you. It's really been great.
So glad that you guys wanted to share your story in Free Principles Stockholm Center. Wow. I'm so quiet. I don't.
Is there anyone out there who have any questions before we say goodbyes to these wonderful people? put everybody to sleep.
I think we have a question here.
Marie says, just want to say thank you so much. Gunilla, so interesting.
Well, thank you all for the wonderful questions too.
Yes, excellent question.
And for all that you're doing. And I know that everybody on this call would have had beautiful things to share, and there wasn't time for everybody, but we know that if you're all on this call, that you're all having, beautiful experiences, and you have a lot to share. So maybe one day we'll get to hear more from all of you as well.
And I will like to trick these two guys to Sweden and give some talk sometime. So would be great.
We'll definitely do that. That would be wonderful.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I've been listening for 30 or 40 minutes now, and I'm very thankful that you've been with us today. And the thing is with this initiative, which we called 3P Center Stockholm, we have learned that to take it slowly, to move where this will take us. That's how it started out. Six of us are just in a room, and we just talked, and 2 hours later everything was ready to just share the principles here in Sweden. And so we're doing the same thing right now, and we're inviting more and more people, and we will be really, really grateful if there are some Swedish-speaking people who would like to talk as well. We have some more next week. We have Barb Patterson in the next couple of weeks, and Dick can also agree to speak as well. So, but we would love to have more native speaking people.
Yes. I can understand that for sure.
Yeah. And we will to create events in Sweden. It's all about. I would like to just share that. I've said it before, and it's all about, if there is a demand for it, to create a live event. We're very up for it, but we need to hear from the guys who are listening, so we don't create something in advance. We did that a couple of times, and we know that we were probably a little bit ahead of our time. But we know we will get there eventually.
Oh, no doubt. There's such beautiful people with so much wisdom. There's no doubt in my mind.
Okay, we have we had someone who would like to participate. That's good, from Sweden. So, but okay, I will just unmute everyone, and we can say goodbye to Jan and Chip, and thank you very much for hanging out with us tonight. Okay?
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was fantastic.
Wow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Call on us
you.
anytime.
Thank you.
Okay. Take care, you guys.
Bye. Lots of
Bye.
love.
Ja,
Bye.
de satt på ljudet för alla.